General Garner, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
So you're back in Kurdistan?
Yes.
How's the weather? How do you feel about Kurdistan?
You mean about the weather or about Kurdistan?
First of all, the weather.
I feel fine. I'm from Florida. Same weather.
You like it?
Yeah.
Okay. But you know, since maybe your last visit, since 1 year, there have been many attacks on Kurdistan. Rocket attacks, even drone attacks.
Right.
How the people feel here in Kurdistan is that the United States is silent. Do you think what should be the reason behind the silence of the United States?
I don't know. I don't know why it's that way. I don't think it should be that way. I think that when you attack, you respond with force. Is the way to do it. But they haven't done that, and I don't know why the administration hasn't done that.
You don't know why the administration is...
No, you got to ask Mr.
And do you think...
Ask Mr. Biden.
Yeah, it's a bit different to ask Mr. Biden. I wish I could have an opportunity to interview him. So, do you think this is a normal reaction from the U.S. government to expect?
Never has been before. We've always responded with force.
So this is a new trend in the U.S. foreign policy?
Well, you don't know. I mean, you don't know. This is the first time since he's been president. He's only been president about 3 months. So you got to wait and see what he does. But he's been very timid with his responses thus far. So we just have to wait and see. Why it's that way, I don't know. I don't agree with it. And I think it's wrong, and I think it gives a wrong signal to the Iranians. And it gives a wrong signal to our Arab allies. But why they are so timid and so reluctant to respond to those attacks, I don't know.
So whoever I have interviewed, like during the last 3 or 4 months, when I asked them about what is the U.S. foreign policy when it comes to dealing with Iraq and the Kurds, the new administration, no one has a clear idea about what's going on. What do you think? What's the new foreign policy of the new administration when it comes to Iraq and the Kurds?
I don't think we've ever had a foreign policy with Iraq or Kurds. I think since the war in 2003, it's been 18 years, we haven't had a coherent policy in 18 years.
I see. So let me ask you a bit about Kurdistan. You know, Kurdistan has been facing tremendous threats and problems. How do you see the way Kurdistan is facing these risks and threats? Has Kurdistan been successful in this? And do you think at the end of the day, these threats are going to help Kurdistan get stronger, or we're going to see a weaker Kurdistan?
Okay, the threat you got internally is the fact that the KDP and the PUK are divided and cannot come together. And by not coming together, they lose everything. Because when we come together, you had a large majority there where you could help control the elections. You can't do that now while they're divided. The second thing you have is in the Constitution, I'm sure you've read it, if 3 provinces are against something the parliament passes, they can veto it. So if Suli, Erbil, Dahut are all together, they don't have to fear what comes out of the parliament because they can cancel it. You can't do that now with Suli and Erbil split. So that's the internal threat. The regional threat is a threat from Iran or the PMF, which are sponsored by Iran, the Hezbollah units, which are sponsored by Iran. And I think those are mainly aimed at Kurdistan for 2 reasons. First reason is to force Kurdistan to tell the U.S. that they want them to get out of there. And the second reason is to try to bring Kurdistan under their control. Internationally, the problem you have is all political. You have, especially in the United States, because in the United States you have a State Department that says there's only one Iraq. They don't recognize Kurdistan, only one Iraq. So if you want to do something for Kurdistan, it has to come through Baghdad. Well, that doesn't work because Baghdad is anti-Kurdistan. So we've had that policy for 18 years. We change the ambassador every year. We change the consul general every year. We change the commanding general of the forces every year. And so you start all over again every year with the same policy that failed last year. You start with it again this year and it fails again. So you have all those things against you. You're your own worst enemy here. Iran's your own worst enemy in the region. And the U.S. State Department's your own worst enemy internationally.
Strange. And what is the reason behind the part with the U.S.? Why the State Department is our worst enemy internationally?
I don't understand why they do that, because their policy has never worked. When you do something that doesn't work, you change it and do something else, but they've never done that. So I don't know what the reason is.
And do you think that this will also lead to withdrawal of American troops from Iraq?
I hope not. I certainly hope not. That'd be the worst thing we could do.
So that's what you hope and what you expect?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, I don't know.
And how would this affect the status of Kurdistan if U.S. troops, like the U.S. administration, decided to withdraw its troops from Iraq?
Then you come under the domination. If we pull all the troops out, Arab Iraq would come under the total domination of Iran, which is almost there now. Up here in the Kurdish region, you'd be dominated somewhat by the Iranians and a lot by the Turks. I think.
Yeah.
I don't think either one of those is good. They're both bad.
Let's go back a bit to history. You were introduced to Peshmerga in 1991, I think. Is that true?
Yeah, I came here in 1991 on what was called Operation Provide Comfort.
Yeah, I see. If you compare Peshmerga in terms of capability, in terms of like capability to fight from that day to today, what do you see?
Totally different.
Mm-hmm.
In 1991, you know, in the period of the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, during that period, if you're a young Kurdish boy,
Mm-hmm.
you grew up here, and when you're 14, 15, 16, you go in the Peshmerga.
Mm-hmm.
In the Peshmerga, you get whatever kind of weapon you can get. A company of Peshmerga all have different weapons. Makes it harder to supply them. But they fight all the time. They grew up fighting. It's part of the nature. I think what's the Peshmerga, those who die, and it's
Who expect to die?
yeah, expect to die. And so those young men who become older men in the Peshmerga and old men in the Peshmerga, they fought many, many battles. They're very experienced at fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very courageous, and they don't fear death.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now when you leave 1991, it stays that way until probably you get to the turn of the century, and after 2003. After 2003, you have a younger generation that comes into Peshmerga. They haven't been fighting all their lives. They've lived in a pretty peaceful environment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you were born in 1940, 1950, 1960, you were never in a peaceful environment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all those born around the late 90s, early part of this century, they're born in a peaceful environment, nice environment. In the meantime, the Peshmerga began to be armed by the U.S. and other nations. And so their arms were standard. I mean, they all had the same kind of rifle, they all had the same kind of machine gun, that type of thing. But what they didn't have is the combat experience that their fathers had and their older brothers had. So that when ISIS happens in 2014, they didn't perform very well. And so in 2014, what happened, the leadership, Massoud, he called back in all the old Peshmerga and told them to come in, you train these young guys. And so the old Peshmerga, and I'll give you an example. When I was here in 1991, the Peshmerga general I dealt with was General Ali. You met with General Ali all the time. Good general, good man. By 2003, 12 years later, 2014, Ali's retired, 23 years later. But they call him back on active duty to come back and straighten this thing out. So I come back, I go visit Ali. He commanded all the forces along the Tigris. So he and I have lunch together. I walk out to where I said, I want you to take me to your unit. Show me what you're doing. Show me what your defensive positions are, how you're going to defend that and all that. He takes me out there and shows me. I've done a good job. Very experienced leader. Old combat veteran. Knows what to do. So I walk down, and the Peshmerga, they've dug foxholes, and they have sandbags mounted up. And I come to this old Peshmerga sitting on sandbags. Got his AK-47. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm getting ready to clean my rifle. I said, well, that's good. I said, how old are you? He said, I'm 85.
85.
85. I said, you're too damned old to be in here. He said, no, it's a good way to die. Now, that's the old Peshmerga. And so what Massoud did, he brought those old guys back. You take these young guys, and you teach them what a Peshmerga is. Right after that, we brought U.S. Army Special Forces in here to train the new Peshmerga, and they did a good job. So I think today, now, the Peshmerga you see today, they're pretty well trained. Mm-hmm. They're pretty well trained. They have pretty good leadership. They've got good equipment. Now, you don't have jet aircraft, and you don't have helicopter gunships, and you don't have a lot of things that everybody else has, but you've got good weapons, you have some artillery, you've got a lot of vehicles, you have 200, 300% better than you were at the turn of the century. Yeah. So I think the Peshmerga today is in pretty good shape. Plus you have training centers for the Peshmerga now. Mm-hmm. So I think they're pretty good.
I see.
They don't have the combat experience that the old Peshmerga had, but they have some. You know, had the experience in 2017 and experience against ISIS. So I think the Peshmerga today are pretty good.
I see.
And I went out to Kak Sirwan Barzani's unit, where he was from Erbil to Mosul.
Mahmoud, yeah.
And when I was out there, they had Army Special Forces guys there helping Sirwan train us. And I asked them, I said, how they're doing? They said they're excellent. They're great soldiers. They're really doing good. I said, would you fight with them? They said, any day. We go to battle with them any day. They're good.
I see.
So I think that's a good sign.
Yeah. And again, back
the
to
problem you have with Peshmerga is all the Peshmerga aren't unified.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got, 12 or 14 brigades that are unified, or supposed to be unified, and then you got 70, Brigade 70 and Brigade 80, which is probably 50,000 in each one of those brigades. They're not what I call a brigade, but you call them a brigade. And one's owned by the KDP, one's owned by the PUK. And until we can bring all the Peshmerga together, have one Peshmerga under the ministry of Peshmerga, that's when it's all going to get better.
I see.
But you can't have the Suli Peshmerga and Erbil Peshmerga and the Dahut Peshmerga and the Zaku Peshmerga and the Koya Peshmerga. It needs to be one Peshmerga.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the international forces are trying to do. They are trying to support the KRG to unify.
Yeah, but they can't do it.
They can't do it.
They can't do that. It has to be done internally.
Internally.
Yeah,
And
the KRG has to do that.
Do you see a hope for the KRG to unify Peshmerga forces?
Well, I think over time, but before that happens, you got to get the KDP and the PUK to start talking to each other again. Mm-hmm. You know, that is you're not going to unify anything until you get the two of them closer together.
So we came to 2003. In 2003, you were announced as the head of mission to Iraq. And the Kurds were happy for this because of the experience they had in 1991 with you. But it was a very short mission. And then Paul Bremer came. Mm-hmm. Why was that too short, your mission?
Well, when Secretary Rumsfeld called me and asked me to do this, they told me, we want you to come. I was retired. Mm-hmm. I was the president of a company. Mm-hmm. They said, we want you to come back to the Pentagon and put together a team that can go to Iraq and handle all the post-war things that are going on. But you won't be the guy that takes them there. We just need you to bring the team together, form it, organize it, and train it. And then the president will pick someone of stature, someone of stature, to be the head of that organization, and they'll take it to Iraq. And the president will probably pick an ex-governor of a state because he was the governor of Texas, and he thinks ex-governors know how to do things like that, in which I think they do. So I said, okay. So I came over, I put together the team, we trained every day. But then things began moving too fast. And so they told me, go ahead and take them over there. And I brought them over, first into Kuwait, and we had to wait till the war got up to Baghdad before, just as the forces would go north, then I would put in my people behind the forces. And so the first place we occupied was Basra, and then the next place first place we put post-war teams was in Basra, and the next place we put them were in Al-Hila. And then early on, we took a team with Colonel Nab and put them up here in Erbil. And then after, I guess, a month or less, even less, Rumsfeld called me and said, look, Jay, he said, the president has picked Jerry Bremer to lead the coalition effort for post-war effort. And I said, okay. And he said, I want you to stay there and make sure he understands everything you've done, so none of the things you've done falls by the wayside. So Jerry Bremer came over. I stayed with him 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, and then I went home.
I see. And today we see Iraq after 18 years from 2003. What mistakes have been done in 2003 and the post-war period, which ended up in this situation that we see in Iraq today?
We had dropped millions of leaflets over Iraq for the Iraqi army. And those leaflets said, don't fight us. Put your arms down, go home, and when we overthrow Saddam Hussein, we will bring you back, we will bring the army back, and you can help us rebuild the nation. So after Baghdad fell, all the army disappeared. The ones that weren't dead, they disappeared. They went home, put on their civilian clothes. And then what happened is Bremer issued, and I'll go back to Bremer. Bremer issued, he did three things. He issued the decree to get rid of the army and get rid of the Ministry of Interior. He issued the decree to start de-Baathification, which went down 4 levels. And he told the 7 leaders we put together to go home. Now, he gets blamed for all that. I don't think Jerry Bremer thought of all that. I think he was told to do that. But I think he's just kept his mouth shut, and he's never said, well, the president told me to do that, or the State Department told me to do that. He's just kept his mouth shut on all that. But anyhow, he was the guy that delivered those orders. So when they got rid of the army, I went to him and said, you can't do this, Jerry. I said, we told those guys we're going to bring them back. He said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to build a new army. I said, look, Jerry, you can get rid of the army in one day. You can get rid of an army in one day. But it takes you years and years and years to build it back. You're not going to build back an army, an Iraqi army, this year or next year. It's going to take years to build it back. But he said, no, that's our plan. So I know that came from Washington. He said, that's what we're going to do. Then I said, well, in your decree, you've got the Ministry of Interior. He said, we'll get rid of that too. I said, well, you made a speech last night on how important the police are, the police force.
By the day you were in Baghdad?
Yeah, I was in Baghdad with Bremer.
So that 3 week which you handed over.
But this is the first 3 days Bremer's there. The first 3 days he's there. So I said, you made a speech last night talking about how valuable the police were. He said, yeah, they are. They're very valuable. I said, well, hell, they're all in the Ministry of Interior. So if you get rid of the Ministry of Interior, you're getting rid of all the police. He said, oh, we'll take that out.
Oh.
So then the next day was de-Baathification. And I went in and said, you can't do this. You can't do this because if you were going to survive in Arab Iraq, you had to be a Baathist. I mean, if you're going to be a school teacher, you had to be a Baathist. You want to be a doctor, you had to be a Baathist. You want to be a lawyer, you got to be a Baathist. You want to be a technocrat, you got to be a Baathist. Most of them are real good people. It's just like Nazi Germany. Most of the Nazis were good people. There were just a few bad ones up at the very highest level. And I said, that's what it is here. And if you do this, which went down 4 levels, I said, if you do this, you won't be able to run anything. You won't have any technocrats. He said, nope, that's our policy. That's a de-Baathification policy. So he did that one. So everything stopped running, stopped working. And then the final thing is he had a meal with the 7 guys that I talked about, and told them essentially, he said, I'm in charge now. You can go home because I'm in charge now. So they left the next day. The 4th day, the first IED went off. Never had an IED go off before that. After all that was done, then the first IED started going off.
Another station is 2017 for the Kurds.
Referendum.
The referendum, and then losing Kirkuk and Shingal and Khan Aqim. The position of the US by the time was they did not support Kurdistan in the referendum, and they did not support Kurdistan to protect those territories. Do you think this position was a right position or a wrong position?
No, it's a wrong position. First of all, number one, the U.S. said, let me go back, 2014, like 14 or 15. Khalid Massoud went to Washington, and he went in and he saw President Obama and Vice President Biden.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he talked to them about independence, and they never said no. They never said yes, but they never said no. So he walked out thinking, well, they didn't tell me not to do it, so I think I can do it. So 2017 rolls around, and in March, he announces that we're going to have the referendum in September. And the U.S. is silent. The U.S. doesn't say much. And finally, the U.S. says it's unconstitutional. You can't do that, it's unconstitutional. Well, it's not unconstitutional. You read the Iraqi Constitution, those tasks not enumerated to the government belong to the provinces. And the referendums are not mentioned as a task for the government, so therefore provinces can have referendums by the Constitution. But the U.S. didn't accept that. All the U.S. helped write the Constitution, now they didn't accept that. So he really never had the U.S. come out and say, don't do that, because if you do that, then here's what we're going to do. They stayed quiet. So he made the arrangements for the referendum. The other thing about the referendum was not a declaration of independence. In other words, after the referendum, it didn't mean that Kurdistan was independent. And Massoud explained this to everyone. He said, what it means is if the people vote for independence, then I, as the president, have to go and negotiate with the Iranians, with the Turks, with the Brits, the French, Spanish, the Italians, and the Americans. And with Baghdad. And if I can get them all to agree with that, then we'll have independence. But the vote was to see what the will of the people was, not to declare independence. And so what happened, the U.S. was silent on it, except for one guy who kept saying you couldn't do it. The Secretary of State was Tillerson. He never said anything about it until Saturday, I think Friday or Saturday before the election started on Monday, Sunday or Monday. And so Barzani went ahead and held the referendum because he knew he could do it constitutionally. And he thought, well, although a lot of people were against it, they never said you can't do that, and here's what's going to happen to you if you do. So he thought he had a signal to where he could do that. So after they have it, then hell, the Iraqis close the airport, the Iranians and the Turks seal the border, and so you're trapped now. It's like COVID. You got that. That's the 2017 case of COVID. Everything has to stop. And so all the Kurds were caught by surprise. They didn't expect this. And so then after that, then you have the attack on Kirkuk, and I don't know exactly what happened there because there's so many explanations of that. The KDP says the PUK left one of their flanks open and therefore, but I don't know if that's true or not. But you had the PMF on Abrams tanks, which is against our laws in the United States. We gave the tanks to the Iraqi army, not anybody else. And if the Iraqi army gives them to another force, they have to get our permission for that, which they didn't do. That's called the Logan Act. And so everything we did in that was wrong. And I think today I think, well, the last administration, by the time it was over, they realized they'd made a great mistake. It's too late. It's over with.
And the new administration, Biden, because like
We don't know where he's coming from now. We don't know. We're not for sure.
but there is a there was this feeling among the Kurds that Biden's going to support the Kurds in Iraq and also in the Syrian side. Is this only a hope, or is there any base for this hope?
I don't know, because he's only been in 3 months, so it's hard to tell what he's
So, like,
doing.
if we go
You know,
back and see his
the problem is he desperately wants to renew the JPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran. So you don't know how much he's willing to give away in order to make that happen. So until we see how much he's willing to give away, we won't know the answer to that.
Thank you very much.
Sure.